The most dangerous lie you've ever believed is this: everyone has the same 24 hours. The sky hung eerily silent above the city of Old Nassau, but inside the palace, something unusual was happening. King Argon sat before a massive map drawn on aged leather, and all of his commanders stood around him, completely confused. One of them finally spoke in a low voice. "My king, the entire army is complaining. We work from sunrise until nightfall, and yet nothing truly moves forward." The king didn't answer. He simply looked at them once and broke the silence with a single sentence. "Then the problem isn't time. The problem is how your 24 hours are being stolen." One commander laughed sarcastically. 24 hours? We all have the same amount of time. There's no difference between a king and a soldier. The king slowly rose and walked toward the fire. Then, in a calm voice, he said, "That's the first lie that destroyed entire civilizations." And in that moment, no one realized he wasn't talking about an ancient war. He was talking about you. A few days earlier, there was a young palace scribe named Lyron. His job was to record the kingdom's secrets. But he began noticing something strange. The very commanders who constantly complained about having no time spent their days moving non-stop. Meetings, orders, discussions, shouting. Yet when you looked at the results, nothing actually changed. One day he asked a guard, "How can these people work all day and still accomplish so little?" The guard glanced around nervously before answering. "There's a difference between being busy and actually moving toward a goal." The sentence stayed in Lyron's mind, but he didn't fully understand it until he witnessed something even stranger. The next morning, the king announced an experiment. He divided the commanders into two groups. The first group could work however they wanted. The second group was forbidden from making decisions throughout the day. Everything had already been planned. The outcome was shocking. The first group felt productive, but by the end of the day, they were exhausted and had almost nothing to show for it. The second group accomplished several times more. One commander protested angrily. "We worked harder than they did. How is that possible?" The king stepped closer and calmly replied, "Because you're paying for something you can't see. It's called daily decision-making." At that moment, Lyron noticed something disturbing. Every tiny decision, choosing clothes, organizing tasks, replying to messages, setting priorities, was draining the commander's energy, little by little. It was like a hidden war, not between armies, but between people and their decisions. And that's when the real question appeared. Is it possible to waste an entire day without doing anything wrong? But what Lyron didn't know was that this was only the beginning, because the king had prepared an even more dangerous experiment, one that would completely change how the palace understood time. And on that particular night, the king ordered every distraction removed from the palace. No messages, no news, not even a single decision, unless it followed a prearranged system. That same night, the first strange signs began to appear. The commanders started breaking down mentally, even though they were doing less work. One of them said with a trembling voice, "I'm not exhausted from the work. I'm exhausted from having to think about everything before I do it." And that's when the scribe finally found the first clue. The problem wasn't time. The problem was an invisible drain, happening every second. But one question remained trapped inside his mind. If this is true, what happens when a person stops that drain completely? And at that exact moment, the king decided to begin phase 2 of the experiment. The night felt heavier than usual inside the palace, as if the walls themselves were watching. King Argon stood before the same ancient map, but this time, no commanders surrounded him. Only Lyron remained in the shadows, trying to understand what was happening. The king spoke calmly. "What you saw on the first day
was only the surface of the problem. Then he suddenly turned toward him. Now you're about to see the real reason people waste an entire month in a single week, while believing they're working. The next morning, a new law was announced throughout the palace. No decision may be made more than once per day. Silence. The commanders laughed at first. One of them said, "How are we supposed to work without making decisions?" But the king offered no explanation. Because he wasn't testing productivity. He was testing something much deeper. During the first hour, everything felt normal. But by afternoon, the real chaos began to appear. One commander stopped an operation because he had forgotten the priority. Another changed the entire plan because he thought of a better idea. A third replied to messages instead of focusing on the main objective. Every moment, a new decision. Every decision, a little more energy drained away. Lyron kept writing as fast as he could. But suddenly he stopped and asked himself, are we wasting our time working, or wasting it deciding what work to do? But the real shock came from the king. At the end of the day, he summoned the commanders and said only one sentence. You did not work more. You simply decided more. Silence. Then he continued. And decisions are the invisible work that steals everything without you noticing. At that moment, Lyron noticed something terrifying. Every commander believed he had been extremely busy. But when the entire day was documented, more than 60% of their time had gone into tiny adjustments. Changing plans, changing opinions, reorganizing, unnecessary responses, overthinking before every step. It wasn't work. It was disguised exhaustion. But what no one knew was that the king was preparing the most dangerous phase yet. He decided to change the entire palace system. No impulsive decisions. Everything had to be determined in advance, before the day even began. And on that particular night, something very strange happened. Instead of breaking down, the commanders began working deeply for the first time. But in return, a new enemy appeared, one no one had expected. Emptiness. One commander said nervously, I'm not exhausted from the work. I'm exhausted from having to think about everything before I do it. For the first time, the king smiled and said, this is the first time you're seeing reality, instead of a feeling. But Lyron began suspecting something even bigger. If fewer decisions created more results, why didn't human beings do this naturally? And that's when the third phase of the experiment began. The king ordered one thing to be brought into the palace: digital distractions. Within a few hours, the palace that had once been calm turned into a silent battlefield. Messages, notifications, information, tiny requests every few minutes. The result was devastating. Every commander fell back to square one, even after the new system. One of them said in frustration, I wasted my entire day on meaningless things, and I don't even know how it happened. But the king simply watched, with an unsettling calm. He walked toward the scribe and said, the distraction isn't the real problem. The problem is that it shatters focus into thousands of tiny pieces. Then he pointed toward the commanders. And they have lost the ability to stay on a single path. And in that moment, Lyron understood the most dangerous truth in the entire palace. It is not time that gets stolen. It is attention. But the experiment wasn't over yet. The king decided to begin the final phase. The phase that would reveal the true secret. What happens when a person focuses on only one thing for an entire week? And that's when the real transformation began.